Hi everybody, my name's Katie Beck. Thank you guys so much for coming. I guess we'll
Go
let you
ahead.
introduce. Thank you. There's like a whole thing
Just
to
letting off the
this.
stuff. So.
Perfect.
So first of all, I want to welcome everyone to our brown. I'm a little sick, so I'm going to try to speak louder. So welcome to our lunch lecture, Community Empowerment, Collective Memory and Archives, a conversation about the Rich Coast Project. My name is Suhey Lugo. I'm PLG Reforma Student Representative. Our presenters for today is Joel Blanco-Rivera, who is assistant professor here at gsLIS and the advisor of the Rich Coast Project, right? And Katherine Beck, who is the director and founder of the Rich Coast Project. I wanted to talk a little bit about this project prior to the presentation so you can have an overview about the project. The Rich Coast Project aims to advance the social, economic, and cultural rights of coastal Afro-Caribbean populations and other communities along Costa Rica's southern Caribbean coast by organizing a community storytelling and collective history project that uses new media to connect grassroots concern with international law. The project will produce both legal research on the issues and a community archive of documents, photography, and video detailing live cultural history, community environment, and land ownership in coastal Talamanca. So now I'll let you with the presenters who are going to talk a little bit about the project, and they are going to focus the discussion on the use of archives to support the efforts of this project.
Thank you, Suhey. Thanks for coming. Just to a brief outline, this is more than a formal presentation. It's actually wanted to have it as a conversation about the topic for some of the reasons. One of them is actually we're in the early stages of it, so we'll give you some background, not only about the case, but also how we got involved in this project and what we are expecting in terms of tutoring possibilities. Have a discussion of ideas also with this, all of us here to think about possible ideas in terms of the aspect of archives in terms of documentation. So it's going to be a conversation about the Rich Coast Project and where we are right now. We want to start with actually a clip. So there's already has been some documentation in terms of recording history through video from members of the community. So I will leave to Katie to introduce.
Yes.
George, this is George Hansel, right?
George Hansel.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for having me. The clip I'm going to show you is of a man named George Hansel. He lives in a small community called Punta Uva, which is almost to the very end of the road on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. We'll give you a little bit of background, but just an interesting fact is that the road that connected these communities to the rest of Costa Rica wasn't even built until 1977 or 78. So to give you an idea of their development history, it was very separate from the rest of Costa Rica and is very unique. It's a unique experience for these communities as opposed to the rest of the country and the rest of the world, really. So when talking about cultural and historical rights, I think it's really important to keep in context the time frame of development and what has happened over the past 35 years and how different the place is now compared to just 35 or 40 years ago. So a lot of people still living with those oral traditions and histories still in their minds have witnessed a real 180 in terms of their connectivity to the outside world and their daily lives. So I spent my last semester of law school. I went to Northeastern. I graduated in 2012. So about a year and a half ago, I spent a few months on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica learning about their current land rights struggles and connecting with community members and just talking to them and interviewing their responses to my questions to try to learn more about what's happening in their communities and about the legal status of their land. So I just want to show you a short clip of George talking. Uh-oh. Sound. Let me see.
Just put it as full as possible.
Okay, sorry guys.
The road is still far to go. Nothing is easy. When you have papers and there's a law and you know, well, yeah, I have this, I can do this, you can move. But up to now, we're still floating a little bit.
How does it make you feel to think that the land and the area that you've grown up in and spent your whole life in?
Listen, the attitude of the government, it makes you think, let's say, foolish. You know, you don't have no good thinking. We grow up as a Christian, we grow up loving, but they make you come crude now. You don't see a lot of smile again. If you are really serious with what you have and you care for your family, you cannot smile too much. For you don't have no basement. Nothing that you can say, well, now they can't do this, or this is the law, and I can move by this, and that's for my grandchildren or my children, and it's okay. For once your family is okay, it is okay too. But if you're scared and things is not right, you think every day you go to your bed, but you can't sleep. That's what we're fighting for. Let's see how far we can reach. And you can't believe much in it. A lot of people come around, yeah, we want to do this, and we want to do that, we want to help you. But everyone looking to see what they can grab. So if you don't open your eye, they push you down headway too. But the only thing I see with this little get-together is that the youth and a lot of people now, they're getting together and they're trying to do something. And not with their eye closed and just don't care. So let's hope we have the strength and the good Lord help us to make things straight now. For us and for the one that coming. For life is for them. I used to my mom.
So yeah, so that gives you a brief idea about sort of the impact on a real human level and at a community level about what this sense of instability in land ownership, which is combining with a lot of other forces as well, the forces of development and globalization, and hey guys, and a real sense of a history of social exclusion and discrimination against these populations over, you know, a longer term history. And so and just to give you a little idea of the background of why I feel like it's really important to do something within these communities to document what's happening now, is that there's a real threat of cultural loss. People like George and other community elders have taken it on to be community advocates and to really speak out to the extent that they're capable and within the networks that they have about these issues and how they're affecting them. But at the same time, because of the economic instability and the threat to land ownership in the area, a lot of young people don't see a lot of opportunity in the area. Previously, as George has spoken about a lot, land was the biggest thing for people to pass down through their family line. And now that they don't know whether or not they own their land, have been told that they're no longer owners, that in some situations they're considered squatters. They have no guarantee that they'll be able to stay on their land into the next year. Homes have even had demolition orders put out against them. So there's a lot of real tangible threat to their ability to stay on their land. It's really disincentivized young people from staying. So that being said, there's a real opportunity here to do very meaningful work at sort of reconnecting the community, reinforcing their cultural traditions, which are up to now very poorly documented, and are mainly oral traditions. So I think that's the basic idea and background for why I think it's really important to pursue a project like this, and why the use of archives specifically can really bolster the impact it has for the communities.
Yeah. I think in relation to that context, to archives, we also see it in two aspects that are related. One, as Katie was mentioning, in terms of the struggles over land rights and the right for the properties, has to do with issues dealing with access to information, in part, government information, for example, and we had seen some pictures of residents of the community looking at documents, and they actually have documents from decades ago, but there's a struggle in terms of trying to find, in terms of documentation, official documentation in terms of evidence. And then the other aspect, which is the one that we're focusing more in terms of, as Kay was mentioning, in terms of documenting their stories, the narrative, and their heritage and their memories. And that's where this archive plays an important role in trying to, the importance of the archive as a tool of documentation and dissemination of memories and their stories, and built by the community for the purposes of transmitting those stories, even along their frontiers.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So this book is called What Happened. This was written in 1977. So this is published in Spanish and English. Just a fact about these communities is that the native language of these communities is English, which maybe obviously for most people is not the main language of Costa Rica. The governing language of Costa Rica is Spanish. So all the laws that are passed impacting these communities are in Spanish, and have been even before Spanish was instituted in their school system. So think about, and like right at the beginning of the process of including these communities within the larger system of the Costa Rican government, any laws passed or any decrees or messages sent to these communities by the central government being in Spanish would be pose a huge barrier to their ability to participate meaningfully within the creation and implementation of those laws. So that's one really important aspect to this story. Another aspect is that this book right here, written in 1977, which you might remember is the same year that the road was built. So a lot has changed since then. This is pretty much the only comprehensive history of the people of the area. So that represents a huge gap in recorded history that is really meaningful for a large number of people, and is a very important tool when thinking about ways that you can advocate for economic, social, and cultural rights of a community. If there's no documentation or information available to advocates, people wanting to put together meaningful legal arguments for the protection of these communities, that's going to be a huge barrier. And so that's sort of one purpose of this project as well.
And we see this idea and its concept of the archives as one integral part of the community's efforts over land rights, over telling their stories, over collective memory, histories, etc. So it's not like a separate thing, but we create an archive. And I think something kind of interesting connecting the way I got involved in the project. Actually, the first time I learned was that semester. I was doing a presentation here in Katie came, it was about Guatemala, and then she talked about this project, and I found it really interesting to get involved in it. And it's kind of, as a personal thinking process, initially I was, let's think about building this digital archive, and I was already thinking about let's design it that way, and then I was like, okay, first let's just get a better sense of, not what as an archivist I want to impose or put into it, but it's a process of conversations, and that's why we're in the early stages. So it is an archive built by the community, both in terms of documenting, not just focusing on the digital aspect, but also physical spaces. And as Katie was mentioning, we have this publication, kind of the archives by myself also as a next step in terms of more current aspect of their histories and the past years.
Exactly. So as I mentioned, this is first steps, and we're really interested in ways that we can start this conversation, not only with interested minds around the United States or the rest of the world in different disciplines that can really contribute to this process, but also with the community itself, and I think that's the really most important place to start. So this winter, I'll be returning to Costa Rica for a few months with a filmmaker, and we'll continue the process of collecting stories like the one we were doing that you saw with George. We also have had a couple law students on the ground since I've been back in the United States, starting to collect documents, going into people's homes and going through their files and starting to catalog and organize what they have and start keeping records about what each individual has, whether it's deeds to their land, old maps outlining the parameters of their properties, birth certificates, social security paperwork, any type of historical documentation that traces their family to this land and the particular area that they're in. Also, photographs, video, if anyone has it, anything that would contribute meaningfully to developing a community's story within an archive process.
Mhm.
So the process has begun. We obviously have a very long way to go,
Yeah.
and part of the trip this winter will be having these conversations with the community about what you would want to see in an archive, how it could be useful to the community,
Mhm.
the ways in which we could go about creating it that could also provide for meaningful opportunities for community empowerment and inclusion of different members of the community. Also, conversations like how do you define your community? Who do you see within this? This area has, over the past 40 years, just transformed so wildly. You have people from all over the world who have claimed this as sort of a second home because it very much, in many respects, is kind of a paradise. It's a very beautiful area. The people are very welcoming and warm, and the living is good in most ways. So there are a lot of new people to this area who now really consider it home. And so that definition of community is not necessarily
Very fixed.
very fixed.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about advocating for secure ownership, who are we talking about that for?
Mhm.
That's very much a question. And I mean, there's one way to define it would be historical inhabitants, descendants of the native inhabitants of the area, the Afro-Caribbean families who founded particular communities, but then there have been a few different waves of different types of immigration. So that's one aspect of this conversation to have.